Hello, everybody. Here we are, ever punctual for 97 episodes of What is Truth. I'm John Barnwell. I'm here in the Straits, Detroit, north of Detroit, actually. And I'm here with the Pastor David William Parry from the city of London in merry old England. And I think it's probably been a pretty big week for Reverend David, so I'll try to be kind to him if it's possible. And he's really sporting quite a look there. He's got the Ben Franklin thing going in spades. Although you got to get those square spectacles. And hello, everybody. And so, how you doing there, Pastor David?
Well, first of all, thank you for the pastor bit. As everybody knows, Reverend and Pastor, and what's the difference? The Reverend bit means you're an ordained minister. The pastor bit is a bit more like a sort of job description. You're the pastor of a church, you run the church. So I'm trying to make things smoother and clearer. I don't know if it's working. But I'm trying. I'm trying to make everything clearer. Oh, gosh. Why is everybody on both sides of this royal death attacking me? Gosh, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's. I don't mind a bit of pageantry. I don't mind a bit of secular ritual. There's a gigantic difference between religious ritual and secular ritual. There are whole library shelves devoted to these things. I don't particularly mind a bit of secular ritual, John.
I think they're trying to convince everybody differently.
I'll get to that in a minute. So, I can see, I mean, people forget how old the land of Angles is. I mean, you're looking 1,200, 1,300 years old. And that's, I mean, the Angles became the English quite quickly, if you actually look at the historical process. So, people here have been around a long time. And, that is celebrated through a way of doing things. And as I say, I don't mind that. I think it's interesting. I think it's telling. I think it's, it's like race memory or something, ethnic memory or something. I have been incredibly busy, but not with matters directly linked to all of this. I haven't queued to see the Queen's body. Unlike David Beckham, it must have been a short publicity week. That's all I'll say. I have not asked to be smuggled in as a celebrity. Shame on you, Phil. Shame on you. And Good Morning UK, Good Morning Britain. Shame on you. If you want to go and see the Queen's body, queue like everybody else. Don't get smuggled in by ITV. Shame on you, Phil. The great and the gay are turning up. I understand giving respect. I mean, what horrifies me, I suppose, in the middle of all of this, and the royals have themselves to blame. They're trying to be like a squid squirting ink and then disappearing about who's the head of state and who's not. It's very, very clear who is in the Constitution. There's no argument whatsoever. So the buck stops there. They are in charge.
Constitution?
Well, no, come on, John. We hit this out before. Yeah, I mean, if I had my way, like every other libertarian in the UK, we'd have a written constitution. We don't have the benefits of that you Yankee boys do. Never underrate Americans. The strength and privilege of a written constitution. You get in tricky waters without one. I mean, we do have Hansard. It is not true that all these documents like Magna Carta form our constitution. I mean, with the passing of the centuries, all of it fell away, and it is not legally active. Our constitution is actually one phrase or sentence, depending how you define it, Parliament is sovereign. That is it. That is our constitution. And the rest is civic ritual. The rest is historical pageant. Excuse me. The rest is, as I say, government documents, what the various stenographers have taken down, what the debates in Westminster. So that's the unwritten constitution, which is, so I mean, yeah, how long do you need to? I mean, one of my dear friends brought Parliament to a halt at one point by challenging all of that. Good boy. But it is what it is. It is what it is until we get to the next stage. I mean, not wishing to be contentious or rude, what we do not want is an American-style democracy. What we need is something like the Swiss idea of how you run a nation with the individual areas completely autonomous, the canton system. And then the different cantons decide how much liberty and freedom they're willing to surrender to come into a bigger decision, like national defense. I mean, that's what we need.
Well, that's actually, that is the idea behind the American system. It's just that they've overlaid a British-style corporate entity above it all.
I mean, Americans have to stop patting themselves on the back and thinking we're all desperate for an American-style democracy. We're not. It's a mess. What we want is a real democracy.
We're not a democracy. That's just it.
Yeah, and I agree 100%.
We're a constitutional republic, okay?
Yeah.
And we use a democratic elective system.
Yeah, and it's still a mess, and we don't want any of it here. I mean, this is a constitutional monarchy, not a democracy. What I want is a democracy. Is anybody mature enough to live in it? I doubt it. So, it is what it is. I mean, only one person so far has rushed out of the, 14-hour-long queues to get closer to the coffin. At the moment, nobody knows whether that's an attack or whether that's some sort of weird bonding thing. I mean, I don't know. But it's just been weird. I mean, of course, I think there were American pundits a couple of years ago that were talking about the royals skipping a generation. It's not possible. Even if Charles wanted that, it's not possible. Everything is as it is. It automatically goes to the eldest son. There's no choice. There's no bargaining. There's no team of lawyers involved. It is what it is. He could be on his deathbed with half an hour left, and he's the king. The end. He's in his 70s now, isn't he? What, 73? So at the risk of being misunderstood, we may not be looking at a huge reign of the new king, King Charles III. We certainly won't be looking at a reign like the traitor Charles I. It was an Irish executioner that held up his head. This is forgotten over here, and said, "Behold the head of a traitor." Good boy. We certainly won't be looking at the debacle of Charles II, although he was a bit of fun, let's face it, picking up women on street corners and buying oranges from Nell Gwyn and turning everything into a romp. I mean, right, yeah, okay, I can deal with it. I mean, so what are we looking at? We're looking at the Windsors hanging on with white knuckles to a historical milieu that's moved on. I notice the younger royals. I know you don't trust any of them, John. I mean, I'm nearly there with you. I trust the younger royals less than all of the others put together. They strike me as extremely efficient with their wants and their needs and their publicity. I mean, the two things that came to my mind recently, I mean, as my partner pointed out, one of them, there was a supposed contretemps between William and one of the paparazzi because he said, "You're coming too close to my kids. Why are you filming my family?" And it looked and sounded like a father defending his family. Hang on, where was MI5? You're the sovereign. You're going to be the sovereign. They must be everywhere. This cannot have happened. It's theatre. It cannot have happened. And if it did happen, it cannot have happened in that way. Or where was the imperial marksman ready to take him out? It cannot have happened. But they're just like us, really, with a bit more money. I mean, this is what they're trying to sell the British at the minute. I mean, when we had the COVID-19 crisis, I don't want to get into the rights and wrongs of that because I love doing this show with John. And it's still controversial, and I think John and I are of closer mind than even John realizes on that particular issue. But I'm not saying what the rights and wrongs are. What I am saying, and which I did myself, there was a custom as the crisis went on. Every Thursday evening, you'd go outside and you'd clap the operatives, the physicians, the nurses in the NHS, the National Health Service, for putting in all these extra hours. And they were working them like dogs. I mean, everybody knew it. And, nearly, because it's such a gigantic institution, nearly everybody knows somebody in it, or they know people who are connected with it. So they were working like dogs. There's absolutely no argument about that. Or rather, should I say more carefully, they were being worked like dogs. And so everyone went out on a Thursday and clapped. And I noticed one very cleverly managed piece from, again, William, where he went outside of his rather large house. No, can the camera pan out, please? It's a palace. It's a palace. Can the camera pan out? It's not just a nice house. It's a palace. And then he started talking about his apartments in that building. What are you talking about? You own the building. You're a prince. It is your building. An MI5 will kill to defend you. So what they're trying to do is we're like you. We're like you with a bit of money, but we're like you. And I detest them for that type of manipulative wickedness that they're now trying to sell in a desperate attempt to keep the Windsor line going. If I had my way, which I won't, there we are. I mean, can we suddenly disassemble all of that stuff? No, not without total chaos. What we can do is step it down stage by stage by stage. If we want a monarch, we can redefine it. I mean, why can't they be like the Queen of Holland? I mean, she used to cycle on her way to her job at the bank, didn't she? That's a good girl. Why can't we have something like that? And if they want to be rich manipulators, okay, do that, but you'll be accountable to Parliament, and we need to see what your monies are, what's coming in and what's going out. I'm sorry. Yeah, I know, which will never happen. So what I don't want, and it's me, but what is it the good book says? There was a voice crying in the wilderness. I wish Charles III would be the last king. I wish it could all slowly wind down and us come into a much more democratic age, but it's not going to happen. I mean, how is it going to happen with people queuing for 14 and 15 hours? With people, there was one guy in the queue shouting out, "I love you." Is that showing respect? I mean, I don't know what that reaction was. Is it showing respect? It's just odd. But I mean, as I said a minute ago, the royals have done their best to make sure it's not clear who's the head of state and who is. Most people think the prime minister is like a president, which he is not. Most people think the prime minister is the head of state, as education falls apart in this country, which he's not and never will be. And I don't know, it's just awful. It's just awful. As I say, love the pageantry, love the horse-drawn carriages, good stuff. And not belittling. I'm rather neutral about Queen Elizabeth. Was it the second Elizabethan era? No, it wasn't. Is this going to be the third Carolingian era? No, it's not. And it's time to let go of all those things, and it's time for us to step up to the mark and ask each other what we want as human beings and how we live together as human beings and what mechanisms we approve of together to allow our humanity to increase. But as I say, I mean, it's far and far and far away. The only other person that really annoyed me was Meghan Markle. Love, please get off the stage just for 5 minutes. It's not all about you. I mean, I noticed one thing I didn't like. She was dressed at a royal funeral in one of the very well-known costumes that, excuse me, Princess Diana used to wear. I mean, little innocent you, Meghan. I mean, that's nasty. Let's face it, little innocent you. No time for the woman because she is as bad a manipulator as them. I don't know why she didn't fit in better. Or did she? That's the point. Is she just part and parcel of it all? There was some dodgy footage that had a close-up of Charles and his eyes looked reptilian. You can expect that, can't you? Don't go along with all that nonsense myself. The bit that worries me for the nascent royalists out there, of which there appear to be very many in this country, there was a double rainbow. I'm not even sure I can say this with a straight face. Do you know that? There was I mean, I don't think it's Project Bluebeam. Not sure I go with all of that either. I'm not sure holograms have reached the military potential of what was done this week. Maybe one day, but I don't think now, from what I know about it. There was a double rainbow over Buckingham Palace. A couple of hours after the Queen had passed into glory. My trouble with that is twofold. All right, what does it mean, if it means anything? And secondly, why wasn't it over Balmoral? Because she died at Balmoral. She didn't die in Buckingham Palace. So, and there was, oh God, the one that's even worse. When it was like talking about a football trophy. The Queen's body arrived back in London and she was on her way to Buckhouse. And there was some delay. Bloody horses. Why can't they act like machines? So there was some ruckus with the horses at the front and everybody got stopped as usual. And a ray of light descended, like in the days of the prophets, onto the coffin of Her Majesty. And doesn't that just prove? Of course, right, I don't know what it's meant to prove, but apparently that's the picture that went viral. And now we all know we weren't dealing with simply a ruthless politician. We were dealing with a saint. I don't really know where it stops. I mean, I'll end up a deist at this rate. Is human reason such a terrible thing? I've got unlike you, my dear friend, I've got a very mixed attitude to the Queen. I suppose that's where I've been beaten into the idea of monarchy growing up here. But I can see it just can't be jettisoned in one go. I really can see that. But I don't think anyone's got the urge or the wish or the will, as I say, the urge or the wish or the will to do anything. Charles is, so you've got the state funeral tomorrow. We're paying for that. Charles went through this ritual. The Privy Council thing is so interesting because it's a ceremony within a couple of ceremonies. And, the responses, the questions and the responses are actually ceremonial. They mustn't be taken at face value because they're not meant to be arguments and decisions. They're ceremonial interactions. And His Majesty, His new Majesty, is going to give back to Parliament that revenue that Parliament gives him to be king. But, right, so let's take a few steps back from that. You mean the revenues that the Parliament originally wanted the monarchy to drink itself to death with? But what about all the other stuff? Like, we pay for everything. We pay for the upkeep of Buckingham Palace. We're paying for all of this. So nobody seems worried about that at all. That this multi-billionaire will not put his hand in his pocket once. And it's just awful. But, that's balanced against other sides. Like, at the end of the day, even if they're partly reptilian, and remember, I don't go along with it. Okay, there's a family that's had a bereavement. So there's something in me that just thinks, no, it's really bad to just pile into all of this and attack. There's an old lady that's just been that's just gone to glory, and her family's bound to be a bit upset. And you can see Charles breaking down sometimes, because rumor on the street has it they were actually very close. I.e., a son being close to his mother. Didn't really like the abuse that was thrown at them, because there's a time and a place. If there's a coffin in an entourage of cars, no, it's just not the time. It's not the time to do that. Again, on the other side, the Republican in me has been outraged this week. People who were openly Republican, I said nothing. I think it's well known, who am I? But I think it's well known I don't want the monarchy to endure forever. There were some younger people who were a bit more robust, but they have less life experience, of course, holding up "Not My King," one or two signs in Scotland. They were not only moved on, they were arrested under a public order. That is outrageous, and that isn't in our constitution. There was one in London, and there was the one that disturbed me the most. There was a young barrister who actually didn't believe this was occurring. Are we in a police state? Yes. It just depends how far we want to move into it. What he did to test the waters was he went to Parliament Square and held up a blank piece of paper, and the police moved him on. I don't know if he was arrested or not, but they were moving him on. And there's a fascinating clip of the conversation where the copper, which means policeman, is actually saying, "But you might write something offensive on it." So is this what we've come to? You might speak out of line and somebody might be offended at some point. This is outrageous. That is not British policing. That is not what this country is meant to be about. But British policing ended a long time ago in any traditional sense. Community policing, which was what it was meant to be, ended with the 80s. Mrs. Thatcher is largely responsible for that. There are good sides and bad sides. Every blessing is also a curse. That's the irony of human life. But you can't help feeling that was a bad move. And now the hysteria that's surrounding everybody in the streets. If I went outside and said what I wanted to, even wearing a collar, I would at least be shouted down. Excuse me. And my opinion would not be respected, if not worse. And you think, no, this is. So it's the 21st century, and we haven't moved on a jot. Not one jot, not one tittle. Nothing has progressed. Nothing has been learned. Will we see proportional representation, which I vote for? Will we see a rational state with politicians serving the people? No, we want. And our dear friend Leo, not having a go at you, Leo, I love you to bits, is going to get his way before we do, John, and the feudal system will be back with a vengeance, and we'll all be on our knees to the local aristocrat. Yes, my lord, no, my lord. They want it in Yankee Land too. Be careful, boys. We're more used to it, okay? They want it over there as well. Yes, my lord, no, my lord. Oh, thank you, my lord. Thank you for giving me a crust of bread. Will you go and speak at the great parliament, my liege, and represent the cattle on my farm? Oh, sorry, it's yours, isn't it? All this will be back very, very shortly, and everyone's going to love it until they realise there is no future left at all. What do you make of that, John?
Well, yeah. There's a tune that was very popular back in the 60s by a group called the Beach Boys. And it was called Let's Go Surfing Now. And I think that, of course, I'm applying a different meaning to it. But, yeah, I thought about it, and I was thinking of all these things I wanted to talk about. And I thought, well, David's probably going to want to at least share some of his insights regarding the recent passing. And all I'm going to say is I almost never watch Netflix anymore because that I just, on principle, who's on the board of Netflix, I find disturbing. But other than that, there's this channel now they have called Tubi, which is owned by Fox, which is marginally better than the rest. At least a couple people on it are. And I was looking for a movie yesterday, and I brought the screen up with all the different movies, and it seems like a good half of them were related to the current events, documentaries, history movies. I go to the store to buy something, and I look, and there's all these special editions on the magazine counter relative to the royals. And so it's this big PR campaign, as I see it. And, you know, I don't know. I don't want to offend anybody, and I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but, you know, shall we say Chuck was he wasn't a good student. He did terrible in school. They put him in the military. He couldn't do his job. So now he's going to be king of the world. That's about appropriate given today's circumstance, you know, and given his relationship with the offensive Jimmy Savile, but yet now Chuck's going to be head of the Anglican Church. It's like, I don't know. Somebody else can tell me what all that means, you know. But so what I like to do here is lift our heads above the fray. And it's pretty easy to get caught up in all the drama, and before you know it, you become a mirror image and an antiomorph of that which offends you, and you start to become as offensive as that which offends you. And I try not to do that too much, but you know, we're merely human. But it helps if you can approach things from various angles. And one of my favorite lectures of Rudolf Steiner, although he has a great many, and it depends on what day of the week, which ones are currently occupying that position. There was a lecture that is included amongst the lecture cycle of the background of the Gospel of St. Mark. It's called Kyrios, Lord of the Soul. I've talked about it before, but I think it's something that you can't talk about too much, because being able to wrap your head around certain ideas gives you the strength to be able to come to the realization that there are things in you of which you're unconscious that are much more high in their relationship to things of the spiritual and soul realms. And so we have to bear the reverence to be able to approach these things. And the word Kyrios, which is usually translated as Lord, Rudolf Steiner gives a different perspective on that. And I want to read a short thing just to frame this so that we can look at this from different vantage points. And he says, in several lecture courses given over the years in different groups and attended by many of the friends here today, we have endeavored to study the Gospels of St. John, St. Luke, St. Matthew, and the great event in Palestine, the mystery of Golgotha, from three different points of view. One result of these studies should have been to establish in our souls a growing realization of the greatness of this unique event. We have understood that the reason why there are four Gospels is that their authors, writing as inspired occultists, each wished to describe the great event from a special angle. Just as a photograph of an object is taken from a particular side, by combining the pictures, each taken from a different angle, an idea of the reality can be obtained. Each of the evangelists makes it possible for us to study one aspect in particular of the great event in Palestine. The Gospel of St. John gives us insight into the great events in Palestine by opening out a vista of the highest human goals and at the same time of the sublime realities of the spiritual world. The Gospel of St. Luke unveils the mysteries connected with the personality of Jesus of Nazareth, with the Solomon Jesus and the Nathan Jesus until the moment when the Christ ascends into him. The Gospel of St. Matthew, as those of you who heard the lectures will know and others will be able to read, shows how the bodily nature in which the Christ was to incarnate for 3 years was prepared by mysterious processes connected with the racial stock of the ancient Hebrew people. In a certain respect, the Gospel of St. Mark can lead us to supreme heights in our study of Christianity and give us insight into many matters communicated by the other Gospels, but in a less dramatic way. And so this evening I will take the opportunity of saying something in reference to the Gospel of St. Mark. We must realize how necessary it is to study many subjects with which superficial modern thought has no inclination to concern itself. If we are to understand the Gospel of St. Mark in its depths, we must acquaint ourselves to some extent with the very different character of the language in which men expressed themselves at the time when Christ Jesus was on earth. End quote. And so I guess the point I want to make is that in growing to this understanding, we have to realize that we have a very kind of superficial way of looking at the world that's been nurtured through the cultural biases and cultural norms in which we've been educated. And so they've done their best to try and eliminate those things which would enable us to be able to come to a proper understanding of the events in Palestine. And it's not necessarily intentionally, because people, by the very nature of their consciousness, come to certain conclusions because that's the end game of the way in which they choose to think about things, or the way in which they're capable of thinking about things. But we like to leave the door open, as you know here. We like to work with the open set so that the spiritual world has a means whereby it can be included in our process of thinking, feeling, and will in a way in which we can approach these things with a gladdened heart and a clarified mind and an active will, hopefully. And so in that process, we can accomplish that goal of which all we're trying to do here is establish what is truth and make further progress in our path towards becoming fully human.
I think that curiously links in with what I wanted to say. I mean, technically, the sovereign is no longer the head of the Church of England. I think it's something like supreme governor now. Therefore, they've got. I mean, they need they need the group of bishops called the Lords Spiritual and their permanent votes in the second chamber to. I mean, as I said, the Church of England, the Anglican Church, is a government institution. Local Anglican churches, which are everywhere, are government buildings, and it is possible to interpret Anglican clergy as government officials. Which is why, the banns of marriage are read out in their churches. And if you want to be married in an Anglican church, certain processes have to be gone through. But it was decided, I think, a couple of years ago that the sovereign really, it wasn't appropriate for any sovereign to be the head in the sense of the spiritual head. But they need the apparatus to still be on their side. I did notice Charles backtracking over a number of things he said a couple of years ago, where he doesn't simply want to be a defender of the faith, which is the title, the ecclesiastical title that the sovereign is given. He wanted to be a defender of the faiths, plural, without really defining what that meant, which of course would put him at odds with the Church of England, whether they liked it or not. And I noticed during the last couple of days there are a couple of speeches where he's going on and on about what a good Anglican he is. I've never noticed that. I've never noticed that, but he's going on about that. So I suppose it's relatively smooth running during the coronation. Oh, we're paying for that as well. I mean, you've got to remember, again, it's the history thing. Ecclesiastical authority in the UK is messy because it's got a long history. There are two archbishops, the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Archbishop of York. They have the same status. They're on the same level. It's just that the Archbishop of Canterbury tends to be a bigger crawler than the other one. So Archbishop Welby, what do I think of him? Didn't he have a career in oil before he became Archbishop? Go back to oil. Go back to oil. You don't understand the church. Go back to oil. So there's sort of there's not really a preeminence, but there, might sort of be almost. So that's why everything's so messy over here. I mean, history's a great teacher, but it can also be the great enslaver. And therefore, everything is a mess. Everything is a mess. But no one wants to clarify it. No one wants to smooth it out. Certainly when I was a young cub, I mean, I'm not a great fan of sci-fi because it strikes me as a genre which is always underused. And it never really, unless it's in the hands of a master like H.G. Wells, it never really reaches either emotional or mental closure. The characters are always left in the air, pun intended. And you don't really know what the scenarios are. I mean, right, is it a dystopia? I mean, what is it? What are you trying to say here exactly? Unless you're Charlton Heston biffing chimpanzees in the face or gorillas or something. What I used to love about science fiction, I suppose I was more on the side of Star Trek than Star Wars. Was with Star Trek, you had this gentle Hegelian progress from simple mammalian states up to this glorious federation amongst the stars. Isn't that a wonderful thought? Where everyone's trying to get on and everybody's trying to do the right thing by everybody. What a wonderful vision. What was that? Gene Roddenberry. I knew someone who knew his wife many years ago. Gene Roddenberry, or was it his wife? That's the bit I can't remember. They either both of them or she was living in Greece for the summer or something. And they used to start reading circles wherever they went. And Gene Roddenberry turned up talking about the future and machines that would one day produce food, and everybody going quiet because they didn't know what to say because it's Gene Roddenberry, yeah. So you just shut up, man. You can't say stuff like that. It's amazing, and he believed it. I mean, this great utopian man, and the original series of Star Trek with that Canadian boy. I can never remember Captain Kirk's real name, William Shatner, right? That Canadian boy. Everything's so hunky dory. Vulcans making beautiful, elegant signs to each other. Everything's lovely. I wish the utopianism, excuse me, the utopian elements could come back, because you knew that there'd be progress in the world and everyone would get more educated. And oh my God, Lieutenant Uhura may be black, but she's still there. Oh, I mean, this wonderful view of hands across the sea and different peoples working together. I mean, what wonderful. And but then Star Wars comes along and everybody's shooting everybody and they're half machines anyway. Not the same at all. So I wish that could come back. I notice that vision of the human future, of our human future, is getting weaker by the year and disappearing. Even on sort of weird franchises for Star Trek now. What was that awful woman? What was it, Captain Janeway or something? A typical woman driver. She ends up in the wrong part of the cosmos, right? So, completely the wrong side. Love, I'm sorry, you're the captain. It's your responsibility. And they have to get back to our part, which is very, very difficult. And so even that's not utopian anymore. This wonderful vision of human beings learning learning how to think, how to behave, how to be respectful. Real democracies, beautiful cities, everybody fed, everybody clothed. That's gone and it's going, and we've got now we've got the sort of Star Wars Emperor. So right, the medieval's creeping back in, even in that sphere. You've got Lord Vader. It's all creeping back in, and nobody seems to be bothered by that. So instead of this bold, gorgeous future of equals amongst men and women of different peoples, now it's all about neo slavery and neocons, and I don't know. It just really depresses me. I wish I'd met Gene Roddenberry. I also wish I'd met Ron Sterling. I mean, I don't know why he keeps coming up over here a lot at the moment. Is that some sort of weird atavism now the Queen's dead? I don't know. I used to love the Twilight Zone. I mean, I know there was so much more to him than that. I mean, he was a political activist, an incredibly gifted writer, who seems to basically redesign the whole idea of the boardroom drama. Incredibly astute, incredibly clever, and always at odds with the powers that be. And he's only basically remembered for the Twilight Zone, which of course actually is more subversive than people remember it to be. I mean, I remember one episode. What they seemed to do, they had a policy that you get nonsense, 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 then something gobsmacking and intellectually. Oh my God, where did that come from? which appears to be his conscious policy. Thought-provoking, not allowed anymore. Clarifying, no, let's make things confused. All of it's now, it's all about the squid and the ink, and not really allowing the evil demos, of which I'm a member, of course. Not being a member of the elite. I'm not a member of the oligarch. I'm not one of the polygarchies that run America. I just find this new dark age incredibly depressing, and the fact that everybody's applauding it equally more. I don't know, equally more saddening than ever before. Is anybody saying anything in the chat room? God, handing back to you, John, before I get totally depressed. Liddy Sinem, forgive me if I've not said that properly. Churches used to be healing centres. Time to go back. Liddy, I couldn't agree with you more. 100% we're on the same wavelength. In the first couple of centuries of the church, they were centres of healing and learning. What on earth went wrong? What on earth went wrong? I mean, I think both, right. Liddy Sinem again. Never underestimate the power of love. Again, yeah, we're on the same hymn sheet, Liddy. Never, never. But let's not be naive about the dark powers either. David Vaughan, the light is in the world. Amen. But the light and our views of the light are constantly under attack, and it's up to us to be more vigilant, not only in ourselves, but in the surroundings we find ourselves in, to make sure that light shines appropriately and that healing is given to all. I mean, we've got to be really careful that the wrong people don't get into the wrong positions and start pulling the wrong levers. Liddy Simon, hugs back to you, my wonderful friend, hugs back to you. Yeah, we've got to recover what we've lost, and only then maybe can we get the type of future that we deserve. John.
Okay. Well, again, the more challenging the times become, the greater the opportunity for growth. And we're being given an opportunity through all these machinations to be able to come to a relationship with things of the higher worlds if we so choose. And it's unfortunate the number of people that don't see that even as an option. And they're not here today because they think that we just sit here and jabber on about nonsense. And that's okay. That's their life path. The challenge, though, for that type of an individual is that their experience as they cross the threshold into the next world is tends to be terrifying, because if one doesn't have a proper relationship and the courage that is provided with that, it is terrifying. It's terrifying to realize that were you to see your own astral form, you would look like a dragon. And that's at our current stage of development, what our astral form looks like, with a protruding jaw of egoism and the receding forehead, of leading back to the animalistic tendencies. And so you have that inside of you, but working beyond that it's very interesting, because that which is higher in you dwells within that which is lower. So you have this curios that works in you unconsciously, and what you think of as your conscious self is the least part of it. It's the mirror image of consciousness. It's not even consciousness. So it becomes quite a challenge to realize that there are a great many people out there that have attained a great many things in their previous incarnations of which they're not cognizant. And as one develops along these lines, you can more or less give yourself a little help by having a little humility. And when one's in a position of power of any form, that's deeply difficult. And so they've created their own snares, or they've been born into. And you're right regarding royal titles and lordships and all that. There's only two ways to get out of that. That's to either commit a felony or die. And although I don't think the felonious part even applies to royals, but it does to all the rest of the nobility. So you have this kind of set in stone system of ascendancy that's tied into the mysteries of Gabriel, the mysteries of the blood, the mysteries of the moon, that were left behind, or should have been left behind, back in November of 1879. But as these things tend to take time to make their transition, as we move into the age of the Archangel Michael, that is the guardian of the individual cosmic intelligence of the individual human being. And so a big part of that drama is portrayed in the Gospel of Mark. And the Gospel of Mark is really a profound riddle. You see Mark being the one who was sent by St. Peter down into Egypt, yes? And so you have Ormus, the legendary founder of the lodges, who was a priest of the Temple of Serapis, who was converted by St. Mark. And so you have this whole tradition coming out of Egypt that was continued by the Knights Templar after they had contacted that stream when they came into the Middle East region during the Crusades. And so you have this beneath the surface tradition that ties into there, and also ties into the mysteries of a Dionysius in Athens that I speak about frequently. Dionysius the Areopagite, the author of the celestial hierarchies, the divine names, also ecclesiastic hierarchies, are attributed to his tradition. I won't say he wrote them, because the documents that they work off of are 4th century, and he was contemporary with St. Paul, which is around 40 AD. But Rudolf Steiner is very clear that that's a tradition where the head of the esoteric school founded by St. Paul in Athens takes up the name of Dionysius as its title for the leadership of that secret school. And that school is a continuation of those traditions that Rudolf Steiner is referring to when he calls the apostles, the writers of the Gospels, inspired occultists, which is a real kind of a head turner for most people because they're not inclined to think of the gospel writers as occultists. But when one looks at the development of the cosmology and the backdrop of Rudolf Steiner, you have to come to an understanding that in the era before the mystery of Golgotha, that if you go back in time, you have this astral clairvoyance of which people were able, as a gift from the divine spiritual world, just as we were given the gift of the ability to digest of food or to be able to hear or see, is that this clairvoyance was a gift that was given to mankind, and that the clairvoyant aspect of it is tied into the astral body. But as we move towards the mystery of Golgotha, that clairvoyant state diminished, and it was taken over with the induction of the influence of the I am, the ego, the individual human being, but didn't have much influence. And so you have this dark period in which the incarnation of Christ occurred, where the astral clairvoyance had faded out as Kyrios, and the ego had not really fully risen to its ascendancy as a manifested aspect of Kyrios, of that which is Lord over the being. And so you have this dark period in which he incarnates, but he's able to inject into Earth evolution 11 of which has never occurred on Earth before, because you have a being who is literally a manifestation of truth. When he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, he means it in the most literal sense of the word. And if you look at a human being, we're a mixed organization, because we also partake of those shadowy realms of the fallen angels. And that is reflected in the fallen nature of our thinking, that is an image of reality. It's not the reality itself. And so by having Christ here as the great example, it gives us something to aspire towards, so that we can take these principles and incorporate them into our ego, which was donated to us from the substance of the divine beings of the spiritual world, in the very real sense of the word, and to be able to take up our physical, etheric, and astral bodies and bring them into a transformative condition over the continuing development of Earth's evolution, as we prepare to take our stature as angels in the next planetary condition. But to understand this more readily, you have to realize that the old moon condition that preceded Earth evolution was when the angels went through their equivalent human stage. But it was entirely different from our experience of our human stage, because for them it was an experience within the astral world. It wasn't a physical existence as we know it. And so you have this idea that when in scripture it says that, for example, John the Baptist was a messenger, the word messenger means angel. So they're saying that John the Baptist is something angelic about John the Baptist, that he had a mission that was so great to announce the incarnation of Christ, that a mere human would have been incapable of fully being able to even stand in the face of that great reality. And so you have that word messenger that actually means angel.
Yeah, I mean, where do I begin with that one? Certainly, no, that's not it. Certainly, let's go back to churches. I do agree they were centers of healing. They were also centers of devotion, what we would call yoga and worship. I think the R word gets far too much of a bad press nowadays, and the spiritual ego of so many spiritual seekers means they can't actually crook the knee to anything above themselves, because there is nothing above themselves. Me, which is not the path. Certainly, I mean, the Gnostic part of me, I mean, I'm not Mandaism, that was it. I'm not a, the Gnostic part of me has been very informative. That particular consecration has been very informative because it makes you aware of things maybe you're not so aware of previously. What would a Gnostic church have done in the 2nd century, the 1st century? They would have a priest or priestess. I think the documents are rather clear on that, actually. I don't know why people are arguing about that. Was it a deaconess or a priestess? Right. Senior female clergy, right, would have stood at the front of the congregation and read a passage of the Gospels, and people would have meditated on that in community. That model is not only innately healing in itself, the checks and balances of that model are far too easily pushed aside nowadays. And what lots of people are actually engaged with is their own personal spiritual fantasy, as opposed to the real religious life. I mean, and it's because of the me culture. I mean, I'm just on the verge of becoming nirvanic. No, you're not. You're just a big-headed nobody. I mean, we've got to remember we're human as well as on the path of the angels. The minute that's forgotten, it's fantasy. It's fantasy. I was recently trying to open a dialogue with the Mandaeans, the last group of genuine Gnostics from those days, I think, in what's left of Iraq. They're still based in Iraq. A completely full line of Gnostics from those days to ours, who, if we want to talk about mysteries, let's talk about mysteries. I mean, Steiner, for me, is an adept, therefore I don't find him mysterious, and also he's a writer from our time writing to us. Therefore, all the accretions of the historical process haven't got in the way, and I'm sure they will over the centuries, but they haven't as yet. So it's quite a clear transmission, and it's complicated, but it's clear what we're dealing with. Whereas with the Mandaeans, it's not, because the accretions have got there, because they're at least 2,000 years old, at least. One of the mysteries, one of the conspiracies I do go for, which may have involved Leonardo da Vinci, is, excuse me, John, I'm going to have to make a huge cough at the moment. I've had a frog in my throat for the last couple of weeks, and there's a early autumn bug that's trying to get into me, and my system's fighting manfully, but it can't push it away at the minute. So my apologies to everyone. There's a wonderful Leonardo painting where John the Baptist is at the side with a divine smile on his face pointing upwards. So who is the savior? Yeah, I mean, what exactly was Leonardo involved with? And in the city states, for want of a better description, he was involved with at the time, they could have been all sorts of things. And of course, the Mandaeans are very cautious about Jesus Christ, because they would say that's a personality. Are you really talking about the energy? Are you really modern terms? Are you really talking about the energy? Are you really talking about the consciousness? Or are you talking about a figure? Which is why they tend to focus on John the Baptist in that incredibly complex scenario of the baptism in the River of Jordan, incredibly complex, excuse me, where the ministry of Jesus officially starts. So why was it John the Baptist that officially starts the ministry? Why did the Holy Spirit visibly descend at that point? Well, I wanted to say that because I think we've got to use these resources to make sure we're not simply telling ourselves how great we are. I mean, I love Alan Watts, but at the end of the day, there's a real danger that I am Buddha. Oh, get out my way. This is a long queue. I've been stood all day, but I am Buddha. There's a real danger that you believe you're Buddha and you're still an arsehole. Buddha was not an arsehole, therefore you're not Buddha. We've got to be really careful of the modern the modern thrill in glamour, particularly, I mean, the Marvel thing is my pet hate at the minute. Not because I don't like fantasy genres, I think they're vital to the human condition, actually. Um, and as someone who's read Freud, I can see what function they have in the psyche. Um, but we've got to remember it's fantasy, it's not religion, it's not theology, it's not the spiritual life, it's not even the life of the imagination, it's a fantasy. And the way certain crowds go on when a new film is being released or a new character is being portrayed by a different actor, I mean, that is almost on the verge of religious zeal. This is unhealthy and wrong. I'm talking Elaine BB. Oh my God. We love you, Pastor David. Chin up. Thank you, Elaine. I hope I've not got the chin of that astral thing John keeps talking about. I'm trying my best not to. We've got to be careful of what we're doing and the way we're doing it. That's all I'm trying to say with that. And I need to, oh God, Paulie, I can hardly read that. Artemisia absinthium, 7 drops may help finish. Oh, thank you. A coming cold. Leo told us about that. I bet he did. About the use of it. Did help me. How many drops did he put in? But thank you, Paulie. Thank you. It's been weeks now. It's really annoying, but it's my constitution. It just, as I get older, these things tend to sort of push me to the edge a bit more. But yeah, that's life, isn't it? That's fine. So I'm worried about what we mean by centers of healing. And if it's too easy, everyone turns up with a divine grin and then they all go home again. That's not a center of healing. Sometimes you need to be told a few home truths. You are a piece of, plain speaking amongst the Quakers didn't mean you never said a bad word. And I have that for a Quaker elder who's a friend of mine. It means telling a few home truths sometimes. You're not on the spiritual path. You are a disgrace. Without the checks and balances of the people around us, we won't find our way forward. We can't find our way forward because of who we are and what we are. We're fallen creatures. And is everyone around us nice? No. And is everybody worthy of our ears? No. But that's where discernment comes in. So maybe as centers of healing, they were actually a bit tougher than people thought. And certainly, as I say, they were also centers of worship, which means people were made very aware that they were not the be all and end all. There was something above them, and that is important, and that needs to come back into our society, because an identification of oneself with the cosmos is not that simple. So, no, I'll just say one other thing to rebalance my British treachery, John, from a minute ago. There are many things I love about this country. Its politics has never been one of them. A constant 2,000-year-old bloodbath. How can anyone be proud of that? And when was it different before the Anglo-Saxons arrived? No. There were Celtic bastards before Anglo-Saxon bastards arrived. No, it's the same. What do we expect? They're people of a limited limited circle of communication, with limited views and limited hopes and limited dreams. And therefore they have to learn. What are human beings here to do? To learn. The school of hard knocks. That's what we're here to do. But there are things I love. British art. The paintings I'm mostly thinking of. The poetry is sublime. In fact, English literature has been called the second great tradition after the first great tradition, which is philosophy, beginning with Greek philosophy. I love the art. I love some of the culture. Afternoon tea with cakes and sandwiches, and it's a ritual. I've actually been through the Japanese tea ceremony, and it's absolutely great. It's mind-blowing. So is British afternoon tea, if it's done properly. And that's not to put down the Japanese. There's a ceremonial element which makes it sublime. The poetry, the art, the literature, Shakespeare, Dryden. It's not really the music. I mean, it's not consistent in the way poetry and the novel, say, are consistent. I love the landscapes, the gentle rolling northernness of this country before it actually gets to the real north. Curiously, I actually do have a huge amount of time for the Church of England, but what it was more than what it is now, and also I mean by that the local vicar, the local clergy, all of them seem to have had this sort of Neoplatonist view of what life was about and where it was going. I like the Cambridge Platonists that really try to inspire people and look beyond these the three-dimensional walls we find ourselves in, and do a decent bit of good at the same time. What's wrong with that? So there are things that I think that have made this country actually quite significant in global culture, which I also believe in as a concept. But right, but I mean, this week has been a excuse me again. This week has been a week of celebrating for me all the things that maybe we shouldn't be celebrating, like conquest, warfare, violence, colonialism. Not to say anyone's better than anybody else. They're not. The most hypocritical liberal. I'm some sort of liberal, yeah. I'm some sort of libertarian on the left side of it all. There was this ridiculous liberal meme that said, I saw going around a couple of days ago, there was a picture of Elizabeth II at the top, then a group of African queens. If you know the woman at the top, why don't you know them? Or maybe because there were no historical documents and nobody knows who they were particularly. Plus the fact the two I did recognise were major slaveholders. How about that? How about them cookies? Let's be realistic, cut each other some slack. Remember, the past is this murky, often saddening place where money, the old gods rule. Who are the old gods? Sex, violence, power, money. Zeus, Aphrodite. We know who the old gods were. They told us who they were. Have they ever left Olympus? No, they haven't. Have they always ruled the world? Yes, they have. Christianity came along and said, oh, we're not denying that, but by the way, there's something higher, there's something better. And all of that is true of the marketplace, and it even happens in your own homes. But there is something better, there's something more loving, and there's something wiser that is above all of these earthly powers. At the end of the day, the gods are of this earth, but Jesus Christ is not. There's something else, there's something higher, there's something more. And that was, for a while, a cherished vision of the Platonic stream within the Church of England, which did a great deal of healing. And, right, Christianity, I mean, it wasn't the Anglican tradition that when the Industrial Revolution started here, people mustn't forget it began in Spain, of course, the actual series of technical innovations that became the Industrial Revolution started in Spain, but they didn't have the infrastructure to do anything with it. So when those same innovations occurred here, which wasn't too far after that, there was an infrastructure, primarily because this is an island. Therefore, you don't have to walk for weeks on end to reach somebody. You will reach somebody. And that's why it took off here. And what did it cause? Untold carnage, with communities being ripped apart, the poor sold into industrial slavery, families ripped asunder, alcoholism, degradation. And it was the lower churches, these terrible people that call themselves Christians, that always used to go to church on a Sunday, basically the Unitarians and the Methodists and the Baptists in those days, that decided that wasn't good enough and went into these terrible hellholes known as the new industrial cities and set up Sunday schools so the young learnt something. They learnt a bit of reading and they learnt a bit of writing, and they could start temperance campaigns telling the men folk, by the way, you're better than this, you're more than this. Why are you drinking yourself to death at such an early time in life? Don't do that. You're more than this. You're loved by God. So if that's not a center of healing. If those aren't attempts at healing, I don't really know what is. John?
Well, that was a mouthful. Yes, of course. I mean, if you really look under the hood in the cadence that is British history, you'll see that it wasn't the crown that through dispensation decided to educate the people. It just wasn't. I'm sorry. Even though they do have a King's College, that's actually something that came in from Germany. The whole idea of having universities was imported into Britain from Germany. But so that's all interesting. They only did that, though, when they realized that the Prussians were getting great effect out of their education system and that their soldiers didn't run away as they were supposed to be marching into battle. So they thought, well, they must be doing something right. Let's do what they're doing. And so it became a useful military path. But so it's difficult to gain insight without having a cosmology. And it's so easy to transport oneself as far as one's concepts into the past and assume that that was what they were thinking, and that's what Rudolf Steiner says, nothing could be further from the truth, that the consciousness was entirely different the further back you go into the past. And so in returning to the lecture cycle, Collected Works 129, The Wonders of the World, that I refer to over and over again because it, to me, is one of the most interesting. And as far as I'm concerned, there's two types of students of Dr. Rudolf Steiner, the ones that have read this lecture cycle and the ones that have not, because there's so many difficult subjects that are treated within this lecture cycle that are clarified, but in such a concentrated manner that it's hard to remain focused while you work through the material. But in here he says, and I quote, in Lecture 8, The True Meaning of the Ordeals of the Soul, Progressive Gods and Backward Beings, the Mystery of Golgotha, he says we cannot come to know occult facts by pinning ourselves down to a few abstract concepts. We have to approach the truth by throwing light on the facts from all sides. The paths of higher truth are complex, and only he can walk them who is willing patiently to trace their labyrinth. And so that essentially is repeating the same kind of seed thought that was in that other quotation. So the fact of that, Rudolf Steiner deems it useful to repeat that. In fact, he continually reiterates that remark because he doesn't give you definitions of the things he's referring to, because that would be inappropriate, because things change over time and place. And so that's why it's such a challenge. And as I've frequently said, studying Rudolf Steiner is the most difficult study one can undertake. If you don't believe me, just try it, because there's never been a good critical work focused against the work of Rudolf Steiner, because people that would tend towards that ilk, they can't read his work because they get to the end of the page and they wonder what just happened. And so you can't just use abstract thinking and riddle through Rudolf Steiner very easily at all. And so you have to be able to leave the door open to levels of moral imagination, moral inspiration, and moral intuition, that's the pathway that he's attempting to help you forge for yourself. But it's entirely based upon your own willingness to be able to attempt to riddle through the labyrinth of ideas, as he refers to it. And so that's something that is not easy to do, considering there's some 5,000-6,000 lectures and 50 books and articles and all of that. And just in case somebody was thinking that he just made it all up, well, it's humanly impossible to be internally consistent over the largest body of work of anybody. I mean, just try and repeat what you said yesterday at breakfast. Good luck with that. So that being said, I think that it's important to keep these things in mind, and that they've been very influential throughout history. Like, for example, most people don't even know. People have heard of William Butler Yeats. He's Nobel Prize winner for poetry, but they're unaware that his wife, that he married at age 52, who was affectionately called Georgie Yates. It was Georgie Hyde Lees, and she was an anthroposophist. And so everywhere we seem to look in the notable areas of literature coming out of Britain, whether it be the Inklings or T.S. Eliot, all of them have been touched by the inspirations that arise through the work of Rudolf Steiner and anthroposophy. And so it behooves one to at least take a peek and see if there's something that might be there for you. If not, that's okay. But all that's expected is that somebody maintain a healthy suspension of disbelief as one studies this material. So that being said, I think it's a good time that we can acknowledge certain people that have been very helpful in us being able to get to our 97th episode. That's quite a missions. And but this podcast has been made possible by the generous support of Tyler and Douglas and Vadim and Vivian and Tim and Neil and Christian and Mark and Maud and Druvman and Laura and Paula and Rick and Michael and Beth and Anil and Fred and Istar and Anna and Russell, Mike and Ray and Whitney and James and Marilyn and so many others over the years. And I want to thank you all for supporting our humble efforts. And in light of that, we also would consider it really wonderful if you'd buy us a cup of coffee. No donation is too small. If you want to get Reverend David a cup of coffee, that's at paypal.me/dparry777. And for myself, paypal.me/John Barnwell 888. And beyond that, we're very fortunate to have here the notable author, I'll call him Reverend David Parry in terms of him being an author, and he can be pastor at other times. But we have his book, The Grammar of Witchcraft, which is a Shakespearean study, and it's not a grimoire. And we have his second book, which is Caliban's Redemption. That's Shakespearean-esque poetry. And he has a masterful gift of using the English language. And his major work is Mount Athos, Inside Me, Essays on Religion, Swedenborg and the Arts. That's edited by the very talented young man, Daniela Hadi-Irandust. And Daniela is also the author of On the Philosophy of Education Towards an Anthroposophical View. And this is a very unique take on Waldorf education from somebody who's outside of the normal arena of activity. You can get a free digital version of this on Amazon, but all these books are available on Amazon. And I have a couple of books, although one of them is slipped out of print. And so if you waited too long. But that's okay, because I'm going to get it reprinted sooner or later, and that's The Arcana of the Grail Angel, a spiritual science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner, of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and the True Rosicrucian Order. And it has a foreword by my best friend, Douglas Gabriel of American Intelligence Media, great many diagrams, extensive bibliography. All of the diagrams are reproduced in my second volume. And It's Arcana of Light on the Path, and that has a foreword by the noted astrosopher and psychologist William Bento. But in here is included, as I frequently note, in addition to my translation of the alchemical poem of the Count Saint-Germain, is the Grail Diagrams, as I call them, and see all the, yes, I read my own books because they're not about me. And in here are a very extensive series of diagrams based upon the diagrams that were hand-drawn and watercolored by Ehrenfurt Pfeiffer, the founder of biodynamic gardening and a very close student of Rudolf Steiner's. And but these books, or this book, the second volume, is still available on eBay from me directly. If you're outside the US, you can contact me through the academia link below and send me a message, or through private message on Facebook, and I'd be happy to work something out for you outside the country. Other than that, it's available on eBay. And so I think I covered everything on that side of the equation. And so I want to pass off to Reverend David, because I see that he's pondering something. I'm not quite sure what.
Well, that makes two of us in that case. So no, I wasn't necessarily aiming the me comments at either you or anybody that listens to this particular show. That was sort of more of a cultural remark. I mean, that's the sort of spiritual condition, sadly, of a number of people that surround us nowadays. And it doesn't make them bad people, but it doesn't make them spiritual people. I mean, a dear friend of mine, I haven't spoken to him for a couple of years, was J.P. Sears. I don't know if you came across him, John. Ultra spiritual. I mean, he's a therapist of some sort in real life, I think. But he did this series of things on YouTube, about being the most spiritual man on the planet. He is ultra spiritual. And it's just competitive spirituality. With him dressed as a hippie. I know Oswald Spengler seconded. Yeah. I mean, I know people like that. Elaine B. just listening to John and Pastor Davis healing for me. Oh, and enlightening. Oh, Elaine, I hope that's true. Listening to John anyway, not this old windbag, but listening to John. And if anyone gets the chance, look at them on YouTube. Every episode opens with a Tibetan gong. And then he's got this long hippie hair. For me, the first one was the best one because he's being ultra spiritual with everybody. And there are these people that come into his video that look surprisingly like him. There's a clue. And of course, basically, it's people saying the same thing without realizing it. Ultra spiritual says it's about becoming one with the cosmos. And his Christian friend says it's all about getting into heaven. And then it's all about, ultra spiritual says it's all about, walking the path to finding your inner self. And then the Christian says it, without Jesus and the word. So actually you're talking about the same thing from different angles. But if you're ultra spiritual, everyone else is wrong. I just find things like that necessarily humbling and funny. The minute we don't, Oswald Spengler, fun fact, J.P. Sears, before getting famous, studied under the fitness wellness guru, Paul, I didn't know that, Paul Chek, who is a practicing polygamist. Oh my God, was he a Mormon? Is he a Mormon? I'm fuzzy on the polygamy thing. I mean, it is scriptural. If we're all going to get high-handed about it all. I mean, let's face it, the patriarchs had more than one wife and they had concubines. And are we going to say they're sinful? How can they be sinful if they're patriarchs? Before we all get on our high horse about that, it depends how you're reading scripture. Those things happened in those cultures in those days. And I heard from some Mormon chums, I haven't spoken to them for years, that it's the women that rule the household. John?
Well, when you have to have a dozen kids just to have 5 of them live to adulthood. It's a different equation involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's without being misunderstood, basically an American phenomenon. Um, yeah, wonderful people. I'd love to go to Salt Lake City. I'd love to see all of the architecture. A bit mysterious for me as a mere European, but yeah. And as I say, so the me remarks weren't aimed at anybody in this proximity, um, but without a sense of humour, without a sense of fun, without a sense that I'm not the be all and end all. I suspect that somebody might be walking up the wrong path. I'm accused often of having a very healthy sense of humour. I do hope that's true. Not because the world is a funny place. The world is an incredibly beautiful and serious place, but because I'm human and human laughter, joy, fun are God given qualities to the human being. And also, if only Caesar had had a sense of humor. I mean, people tend to forget that in those days, this would have happened to Caesar when he went back to Rome after conquering the Brits, and flowers were being strewn across his path. What was it? With 6 white stallions and golden armor, and him crowned by the Senate. There was a priest actually at the back of his chariot, stood repeating all the way through Rome, "Remember, you are mortal." That certainly doesn't happen anymore. Or if you take kings, I mean, it's a very popular subject at the minute. Are they the "I'll go first" chaps? Are they the first amongst equals? Are they the magic workers of the clan, the tribe? Are they the representative of their nearest and dearest, the people around them, all the people of their villages? Because that's what they were. But is that what they are now? Without the sense of humor, without a druid turning up and saying, "My God, you're a bastard." Without that, and only druids can say that. Without that happening, and that happens nowhere now. It needs to be said to Putin. It needs to be said in America. I won't say to who. It needs to be said in Britain. You all know who I mean in Britain. Um, because we are all mortal. There's more to us than that. But will we ever actually reach that stage until we can embrace our humanity? I suspect the answer is no. I mean, all this AI malarkey and all this transhumanism, apart from the fact I think there's something increasingly sinister. I mean, what started as some sort of weird conversation amongst futurists in the 60s, which seems to be something to do with Robbie the Robot and everybody living on Mars, which struck me as rather healthy. Nowadays, it's about surrendering your limbs and parts of your brain into being a cyborg, which doesn't strike me as healthy. Do we have to go beyond the human? I mean, will that solve our problems? Will it solve our problems if one of the Rothschilds can turn off the switch of someone who's irritating him? Will that solve our problems? I doubt it. Will the new slavery, will the new feudal system be much worse than anything that's ever occurred in history previously? The answer is yes, because of the technology. Will that solve our problems? No, it will polarize both sides, and the nastiness and aggression will be off the scale compared to any other time in any other century and any other decade. What will save us, dare I say, anthroposophy, which I do believe, what will save us is embracing our humanity, and embracing the good bits, not just the bad bits. The bad bits are the bad bits. We work with them, or we become less than human. If you don't work with them, you lose your humanity in a different way. But if we end up at the end of the day thinking, well, maybe I'm not all bad, maybe the guy next door is a human being too, and I need to say sorry at some point. Maybe my boss isn't such a jerk. Maybe he's just doing his job. Maybe I should be a bit more loving. Maybe I should be a bit more truthful. Maybe I should remember my family. Maybe I should tell my partner I love him or her I love the kids. I love the family. Maybe, just maybe, that will save us all. And then the angelic path will open before us. Just a thought. What do you think, John? Right, I couldn't unmute myself because the message appeared over the mute button. Liddy Sinem, I'm so sorry, Liddy, if I'm saying it the wrong way. This week will be epic. ... Looking forward. Likewise. Yep. What do you think, John?
So, again, like I keep repeating ad nauseum, perhaps even, is that there's an opportunity here. And if you aren't seeing it, it's your fault. Not that there's any blame associated with it, but it's that what we're supposed to do, again, it goes back to the old saying that everybody, even pop stars, repeat, is Friedrich Nietzsche, anything that doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That's actually true. And that's really a telling statement that goes all the way back to his first public work that made him famous, The Birth of Tragedy, to where he was able to articulate the two fundamental streams within Greek culture, the Apollonian stream of the north and Southern Dionysian mysteries of the south, and how those two fundamental aspects are what formulates the basis of the musical and theater culture of ancient Greece, and that our understanding of all of these things, the whole ritual life of the church and of all the lodges, is basically an outgrowth of the ancient mysteries of Samothrace and the Eleusinian mysteries and the mysteries of ancient Egypt and the mysteries of the priesthood in Israel. And so you have this whole concept of that if you can come into a relationship with things and develop a rhythm, it's very helpful in developing your relationship to the world of the etheric, the world of life, the world of memory. And so we do this, and likewise our Lord says, do this in memory of me.
Is that the link where I meant to say the prayer? You were so skillful, right? John improves what an anchor he really is. And it was so subtle, I wasn't sure I should have dived in. What can I say? I love our Sunday sessions. I love our little community, our little church. I absolutely love it. I love everybody having their say. I love everybody, chipping in and making the show what it is. It's a unique little show. And it's a great shame more people don't realise what it is and what we're all trying to do. And I do mean what we're all trying to do. I don't have a set prayer for today. I don't want to say the Paternoster again because it shouldn't be cheap and that I've been saying it all week. I do want to sort of speak just extempore for a moment and say, let's remember our grandparents and our parents without which we wouldn't be here. Let's remember our friends, which have knocked a few rough corners off us and helped us survive every challenge that's been put in our way. Let's remember all those that proved to be great lessons in our life. And let's remember all those that proved to be an inordinate blessing. My friends, as dear Liddy said a moment ago, this will be an epic week for all of us. Remember the Christ in your heart and in your mind, and may that light shine upon your way ahead until we meet again. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you all so much. And Reverend David, Pastor David, that is. I look forward as always.